UFC Fight Night Rozenstruik versus Gaziev is this weekend, and I'll be going through the entire card, giving my predictions and breakdown for every single fight. It's a great card this week. I really do think this is one of the best Fight Night cards that we've seen in a while, at least Apex Fight Night card. So some big names, some good matchups, and I'll go through every single fight and give my predictions, and hoping to go undefeated this week because there are some picks in this card that are pretty automatic in my opinion, and I think a lot of them are automatic outside of a couple. So let's get started with the first matchup. We have Ludovic Klein versus AJ Cunningham. Ludovic Klein was originally supposed to face Joel Alvarez, but Alvarez pulls out AJ Cunningham in. This is kind of a late notice pick, but I'm going to go Klein. Last time out against Ignacio Bahamondes, he showed that he can use the grappling to win fights. He is a decent boxer. I'm going to pick him in this fight to win by round 2 KO. Not much into it. This is a last-second replacement fight. Guy coming in on a couple days' notice. I don't really trust that, and I've seen Ludovic Klein hang with some of the decent grapplers and decent strikers in the 155 division. He looks solid. He is solid. So I'm going to go Ludovic Klein, round 2 KO. Next up, we got Abdul Kareem Al-Sawadi versus Loik Radzhabahov. Sorry if I butcher that name, but I'm going to go Abdul Kareem Al-Sawadi. When I'm watching the tape, both these guys are pretty hard punchers, and I think Abdul just has a little bit more variation in the strikes and is probably the cleaner striker. He has higher output. He has the better cardio. And I think ultimately what's going to win him this fight is the low kicks. He used it in his last fight pretty effectively, although Loik, I'm just going to go by Loik. I'm probably butchering the last name. I remember listening to it. I just can't remember it. Loik, although he's probably the better grappler in this, his chin and his cardio just aren't all there. And he is really open on the feet, although he has kind of been posing with powerful hands. Abdul Kareem Al-Sawadi showed that he's well-rounded. He can go a full 3 rounds, which for Loik, that's kind of been a problem in his career. And he has also missed weight in his last fight. So I'm taking all these into considerations, right? Can Loik get down to 155? Abdul Kareem is just the more well-rounded fighter. And I got him by TKO in round number 2. I think he'll stun him with a shot. They'll go into a grappling position. I think he'll TKO him on the ground. It'll ultimately lead with the leg kicks. He'll be at range, hitting him all day with the low kicks. And I think ultimately, although Loik is a better grappler, I think Abdul Kareem Al-Sawadi has good grappling himself, which I'm going to pick him in this fight because I think he's just a younger fighter, more experienced. And Loik, although he has experience in the octagon, he just has looked sloppy. He has never really put it together. So I'm going to go Abdul Kareem Al-Sawadi, round 2 TKO. Next up, we got Venicius Olivera versus Giannis Gamori. I'm going to go Venicius Olivera. This guy is an amazing prospect, and I'm excited to see him this weekend because we only got to see him on the Contender Series in one fight, but what I took away from watching him outside of the Contender Series is obviously he's a KO artist. We know that. He's got good footwork to get him out of positions, and ultimately his defense is based on the good footwork and the good head movement. He does have powerful hands, and he is experienced, right? He is experienced. The only question I have is how good is the cardio, and he may be a little too wild for Giannis, which Giannis is more composed. He's going to stay at range. He's not really going to be flustered by many of the attacks. And I think Giannis, it could be a good underdog pick here, but I just don't think he's got what it takes. He's just not as fast and as powerful and explosive as Venicius. It's a popular pick for a reason because we see him and you're just like, yeah, that guy's going to win because he's more powerful, more technical. And ultimately, I just think he'll overwhelm Giannis, who, although Giannis, had a decent little fight with Gomez, it was a tit-for-tat shitfest. And the shitfest stunk up the entire fucking building. And it was boring, and he's a boring fighter. And I just don't want to pick this guy who's going to fucking stink it up. So I'm going to go Venicius Olivera by round 1 KO. That's normally when he does it, round 1 guy. And I just think overall, you're just going to overwhelm Giannis, who, although stays composed, This guy's a different beast. Venicius, Olivera, round 1 KO. Next up, we got CLD, Christian Leroy Duncan versus Claudio Robero. God, I'm not impressed by Christian Leroy Duncan. I think, yeah, he's a good striker that is flashy at times. It's just, it doesn't amount to really anything. You watch this guy back, just not impressive performances. And speaking about someone who doesn't really have impressive performances in the UFC, Claudio Robero. I think both these guys, respectively, are not that good of fighters, right? We kind of know that. I think a lot of people hopped off the Christian Leroy Duncan bandwagon pretty early, although he has some guys that are, you know, I am picking him to win. I'll get that out of the way. I'm picking Christian Leroy Duncan to win by round 2 KO. He's just faster, and you know, he moves quick, and he's an Apex superstar. Basically is what he's a UFC Apex superstar. In his last fight, he made Dennis Tululin look like a punching bag, which it's Dennis Tululin. Let's not take too much into that, but Claudio Robero is kind of almost on the same level as him. He got a lot of hype going into his last fight against Roman Kopylov, which he got his head kicked into the bleachers. And both these guys, although they're known as good strikers and powerful guys, you gotta watch out for Christian Leroy Duncan when he's going. Tit for tat bullshit, Apex superstar. I'm not really interested in Christian Leroy Duncan, although I have him winning. Robero just not high output enough for me to pick him. And although you know what, it's a decision or round 2. I'm gonna go decision by Christian Leroy Duncan. Just uneventful, not really hyped for this fight. Both these guys are not very good. So I'm going to go Christian Leroy Duncan by decision. Next up, we got Iman Zahabi versus Javid Basharat. Oh my God. Javid Basharat, every single fight, he does something illegal to ultimately win himself the fight. Probably going to do in this fight too. Javid Basharat, my God, dude. It's like he's good and he will beat Iman Zahabi, which I'll get to why he'll beat him. You watch his fights, why is there so many sequences where he either low kicks someone, you know, eye poke some, head clash? You see it in every fight. And he is skilled. I will give Javid Basharat some credit. He is skilled. He is pretty well-rounded for a decision merchant that he is. I wonder how the guy got so many finishes outside of the UFC. Because he has no power. He's pretty frail. I could see submissions, but also his grappling's a little overrated. I think his grappling is severely overrated. He can't really hold anyone down. I expect Zahabi, you know, training with his brother who trained George St. Pierre, his wrestling, his grappling will be on point enough until it's not. And I think Basharat's going to get this one done by decision. Both good strikers. Ultimately, it just came down to Basharat's just a little quicker on the feet. And Zahabi, although he's looked really, really good, and he could get the knockout, and I'm hoping he does because I was almost about to pick him. But Basharat's just too quick. He's probably got the edge over Zahabi a little bit in each category of the fight game. So I'm just going to go him by decision. Just going to keep stinking it up, keep cheating. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think he's going to get this one done by decision. Next up, Eric Anders versus Jamie Pickett. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm going to go Eric Anders. Just a more well-rounded guy. Jamie Pickett's been around. You can't be Josh Fremd. I'm sorry. You just don't deserve for me to pick you in a fight. Jamie Pickett. I don't know how he's still in the UFC. This guy's 13-10. Not very good. Eric Anders is just good enough to get by Jamie Pickett, and I think a level above. Just a better overall. He can mix both skills up pretty well. I'm going to go Eric Anders by round 2 KO. I don't know if the Raul Rosas Ricky Turcios fight's going to happen, so if you didn't remember my pick from last week, I picked Raul Rosas Jr. to win. I don't know if it's going to be on this card, when it's going to be. I heard it's going to be this card. It's not officially 100%, but I'm going to go Raul Rosas Jr. If you want the full description of the fight, just go look at my last full card prediction for the UFC Mexico City. I just thought, you know, his grappling is just going to be too much to overwhelm Ricky Turcios, who's not very good in any position necessarily, but it is decent enough to eke him by a decision in most fights. But in this one, I think Raul Rosas Jr. gets it done by a round 1 submission. Next up, we have Matt Schnell versus one of the hotter prospects, Steve Erceg. 2 wins in the UFC for Steve Erceg, and he's ranked in the top 15, which is crazy. I think he's going to get this one done by KO. He doesn't have a K. He's got 1 KO, and this is why it's controversial. Matt Schnell just doesn't have a very good chin, and although Steve Erceg doesn't have much power, it's like a stoppable force meeting a movable object. Really, that's what it is. I think Steve Erceg's gonna knock him out. I think he's really trying to build a name for himself. He's coming off of 2 great wins. He probably wants to get a finish, and I think he's hungry for a finish. Although Schnell is tough and could submit Steve Erceg in this fight, I think Steve Erceg's just gonna have his way with him early and often. Gonna find, you know, the jab, and I think this one will be a round 3 KO, probably later, probably just send him down after he drops him a couple times in the fight. And Steve Erceg's not the biggest power puncher in the world, but Matt Schnell seems to be knocked down in every single one of his fights. I don't really expect that to change much. Steve Erceg's gonna get this one done by round 3 KO. The return of Umar Nurmagomedov versus Bekzat Almakhan. And don't have to put too much thought into this pick. I'm going to go with Umar Nurmagomedov. The guy was favored to beat Corey Sandhagen last August. Obviously pulled out of that fight. Hasn't gotten a fight since. Now he's fighting a Bekzat Almakhan character who's 17-1. Umar's just going to steamroll this guy. Let's be real here. He's going to steamroll him. Probably around 1 KO, maybe around 2 KO. Umar Nurmagomedov is just so well-rounded. The time is ticking before he becomes a champion in the UFC, and I think everyone knows that. I mean, he comes from an amazing camp. The bloodline is there, and he's just so damn skilled. You watch how he strikes. He really is light on his feet, and he can stab that front foot anywhere he wants. Question mark kick, front kick up the middle, lead leg kick, everything he wants, and that'll control the fight. And even if he does get tagged up with some shots, he's got decent enough boxing and the ground game. People forget about Umar Nurmagomedov in the ground game because they hear the Nurmagomedov and they think ground game, but then when they think of Umar, they think of the striking because he is so flashy and does like to strike a lot. And I think he'll use his wrestling. Maybe, you know, I don't think he's going to use his wrestling. I think he's going to knock him out in the first round, like I said. I don't think no wrestling is going to be used for Umar. I think this is going to be straight on the feet. This guy's taking it on somewhat short notice against one of the most dangerous guys in the bantamweight division. Yeah, give me Umar Nurmagomedov. Easy. Easy. This is probably the most confident I've been in a pick all year. And I think he's going to get this one down by round 1 KO. Just the better guy. Don't have to think too much into this one. I'm going to go Umar Nurmagomedov. Next up, got Alex Perez versus Muhammad Mokaev. And I'm going to go Muhammad Mokaev in this fight. I think a decision is what I think is going to happen. Both decent grapplers, right? Like, Alex Perez is no slouch on the ground. But he's just... The guy's had 12 canceled fights, 10 canceled fights, whatever, how many canceled fights in the last 3 years, 4 years. I mean, the guy never fights. And he's always pulling out of fights. All the fights are always just going through. Muhammad Mokaev's younger and he's hungrier, right? Perez, the only thing he can really bank on is the grappling, and which I don't think Muhammad Mokaev is the best grappler in the UFC by any means. I just think Alex Perez just isn't that good. Just straight up, I think Muhammad Mokaev is going to have his way with him. And you know what? I'm going to go round 2 submission. I think round 2 submission makes more sense. I was between the two. I didn't know, because I think Alex Perez just has good enough grappling to stay away from positions, but also Muhammad Mokaev. Like, we saw what he did to Tim Elliott, and Tim Elliott's a pretty good guy on the ground, and he's been more active recently. Give me Muhammad Mokaev, round 2 submission. the better grappler, the fresher fighter, the younger fighter. Perez just, I don't see him getting this one on. So I'm going to go Muhammad Mokaev, round 2 submission. Next up, we got Vitor Petrino versus Tyson Pedro, and I'm going to go Victor Petrino by round 1 submission. I think he's going to ragdoll Tyson Pedro, who's not a bad striker, but Victor Petrino is just a monster everywhere. Monster. This guy is one of the better prospects at light heavyweight. If you don't know him, you better tune in this Saturday because this guy is a monster. He's had 3 fights in the UFC and just really ultimately used his grappling to win majority of those fights. And I think he'll use it again in this fight. Tyson Pedro, he's a decent little striker, but I just think he's going to get ragdolled. This guy, Victor Petrino, every single fight he's had in the UFC, just impressive grappling and just powerful too. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He doesn't have the longest reach in the world, but the grappling will take him a long way. And I think his striking is really good, which is scary for a lot of light heavyweights. He's just going to keep evolving, and that ground game's not going to go anywhere. And a lot of these light heavyweights don't really have grappling to match Victor Petrino. I'm curious to see how far he can go in the UFC, but I got him by round 1 submission. I think this is probably one of the bigger locks too. I just think he's going to dominate him on the ground. Maybe piece him up too while he's still there, but ultimately round 1 submission. Just going to get it done and submit Tyson Pedro. Next up, we got Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Shamil Gaziev, and I got Shamil Gaziev round 1 KO. We've seen Jairzinho Rozenstruik many times just get ragdolled and beaten up and bruised and battered by some of these heavyweights. And I think Shamil Gaziev just has enough skill, just enough, to beat Jairzinho Rozenstruik and ultimately knock him out. Look what Alexander Volkov did to this guy, to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Just demolished him. Jailton Almeida did the same thing. A lot of other heavyweights have done the same thing. I think they're trying to give Shamil Gaziev a step up in competition, obviously, and want an easier matchup for the guy. What about a guy who's just going to strike with you all day? And Shamil Gaziev is the better striker. He will land the better combinations. Ultimately, he will drop them probably within the first 2 minutes of the fight. And it will be a lot of body, a lot of head, and Jairzinho will just have to shell up ultimately, and it'll be a sitting like this TKO. And we've seen it many times from Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Just can't ultimately put it all together. He's got some power in those hands, but I just don't think he's going to find that lucky punch. I think Shamil Gaziev is just going to take it to him early and knock him out in the first round. And Shamil Gaziev, I hope he wins because there are some decent matchups for him in the heavyweight division. Alexander Volkov, who I just said, would be a great matchup. A Derek Lewis matchup would be a cool matchup, although I doubt they'll ever do that because I'm sick and tired of Derek Lewis fighting contenders too because he just gets destroyed. But Shamil Gaziev, he'll get this one done in the first round. A lot of these heavyweight fights, you just kind of go off of who's more skilled and you pick them. Really, we've seen one fight from Shamil Gaziev destroyed Martin Buday pretty easily, and although Buday's not on the same skill as Rozenstruik, you just saw the levels. And yeah, this should be a really good fight night card, and I'm excited. And don't forget, this one starts early for the US. It's 1 Eastern, 12 Central, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, it's an early start time, so make sure you guys are ready to go. Should be a great card. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It'd mean the world to me. Comment down some video ideas that I should do in the comments below. Yeah, just another great fight night card. We're closing in on UFC 299, and I'm gonna be making my main event prediction. And yeah, I'm excited for that. So yeah, until next time,